Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of my new podcast, Utter Politics, hosted by me, Alex on Politics. And today, my first guest, I'm joined by another fellow TikTok content creator and political commentator. It is Hunter, or as he's better known as with his 84,000 followers on TikTok, it's RoteRote. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing quite well, or as well as you can do in these chaotic times. But thank you so much for inviting me on, and I wish you all the best and good luck on your new podcast, and may it be successful and you get all the listeners possible.
Thank you very much. I mean, it should be quite a good opportunity for you being the first guest on on the new podcast. But no, one reason I really wanted to have you on as my first guest is because I mean I'm a big fan of your work. I remember I've seen you do work on Reform UK. Your Operation Restoring Justice video was one of the best videos I think I've seen on TikTok on literally doing a deep dive into the dangers of a Reform UK government and how the right is becoming so prominent in the UK. But you also do a lot of content on Europe as well and where that's heading. So my first question really is going to be why on earth did you start doing all of this political commentating, TikTok content creation in the first place, and what were you trying to achieve with it?
So I had been working at the European Parliament doing communication. So I was the graphic designer and video editor for the Party of European Socialists, which is one of the big umbrella European-wide political parties. It's the one that labors in, and then like other organizations like the SPD in Germany and like Parti Democratico in Italy and yada yada. Um, and for years, I was telling my bosses what they needed to do with communications and these emerging platforms and all these other ways that they needed to be participating in trying to shift cultural hegemony. And they just didn't listen. They just didn't listen for years and years and years. And my friends kept saying, Hunter, you're miserable. Like, why don't you do this yourself? Like, instead of trying to like convince these people who will never be convinced to do something completely different. And I was like, well, I was very hesitant. So, like, first of all, I don't like listening to myself uh like recorded or seeing myself on camera. So I was very, very like not about doing this for a while. And then like I kind of like got beaten down after like so many of my friends kept telling me to do it. And then I just started going because I was like, all right, I gotta walk the walk. I can't just talk the talk. Someone needs to be talking about Europe, the EU, about all these countries in Central and Eastern Europe that there's basically no content in English around, or very little there is. And then also like the connections between like the global far right and but like from this like European side of things,
Yeah.
and this is really like under expressed, especially like in platforms like TikTok or a lot of the short form stuff. And the reason I chose to go like really hard on TikTok was because at the time, whatever, I started like 3 years ago, I guess now, or almost 3 years. Um, that's where the game was. Like you have to think about like the meta, if you will, of political communications and where that kind of lies. And at that moment in time, like TikTok was definitely like the moment. I think now it's into this streaming space, which is something I'm really struggling to do because it's not content I personally consume.
So do you, when you stream, like you do YouTube streams and TikTok streams as well? Because that's obviously the new, I feel like the way that politics is moving in these days is more long form as well. Like that, especially you look at the outcome of the American election, US election in 2024, a lot of people will put that down to long form content and the fact that Trump went on to Joe Rogan, which has the most listeners in the world. Whether that had an effect or not, we don't know for sure. But we saw there was a lot more of him in that sphere, which is what a lot of people were moving into. And that was obviously could have been a major effect on him winning it.
So one of the things I think about when I think about streaming is the Bernie Sanders campaign did a campaign podcast called Field the Burn, so like a cow's field. And one of the episodes had I think it was Hassan and some other guy who was like working on the campaign doing their streams. And they were talking about like the mechanics of how streaming works and how the audience interacts with this medium. And one of the things that just has stuck in my brain, like radioactive material since then, was they were saying, the average listening time you will have for like a stream is like between 4 and 6 hours.
Yeah.
And then they're just like, if you talk to someone for 4 to 6 hours, they believe the thing you believe. Like that's just how it is. Like no one
Yeah.
sits there and listens to someone in their head for that long and it doesn't rub off on them. And that kind of clicked in my head. I was like, oh shit, they are so absurd, absolutely right. And if you even think about like the older formats, like the talk radio, especially conservative talk radio in like the 80s and 90s, this was like a huge medium. Younger people won't know like this character, but like Rush Limbaugh was this really big radio host on the right for a very long time. And he kind of like pioneered this like intensely long form kind of Joe Rogan-esque stuff. And you have to think like the more time you can spend with someone doing politically socializing them into the views that you want them to believe, the more effect it will have. And then you have to think that this is operating all the time, not just within the election space. It's not
Yeah.
just like the 2024 election, it was every minute between the 2020 election and the 2024 election. And especially when you have political ideologies like the right that are not only like very internationally linked up, but also are subsidizing a lot of their media production and have entire platforms that are dedicated to right-wing content. I mean, you have Rumble, Kick, Gab, like I can go on and on.
Even
Donald
X at
Trump,
this point, yeah.
yeah, and I mean X is like, I mean it's like a fascist platform run by like a fascist dude. So unfortunately, it's also the place that a bunch of politicians are really addicted to, and they will not leave it. And this is a big
That's
problem.
where they'll get their online validation, I guess, is from seeing, oh, 10,000 people have liked my tweet or whatever. I'm going to be continuing over there, and then it's pretty much an echo chamber now at this point. I mean, I'm on it just to take the piss out of many right wing people who post some extraordinary things you see sometimes, but it's a lot of these social media now has become an echo chamber.
I,
Makes
I
sense.
mean, one of the things I realized working at the European Union was that the way how politicians understand social media and like the point of it. And for the most part, especially like posting on Twitter, and you see this like very like in your face these days, they are signaling to each other. So like you weren't creating content for like the general audience. You were really sometimes making content for like a specific politician or like the other party's comms director. Sometimes I felt like, and it's this kind of like, you know, it's almost like in a royal court where like the courtiers would signal to each other about like their how they would feel about particular events and the days going. And it has this kind of presentational aspect, and it's not being thought of in the same way as the right does, which is like this is a tool to change minds on a mass scale. You industrialize that, you industrialize your politics, you can change a wider thing, or you can get people to believe in completely fantastical things, because that's the other big effect of kind of like the totalizing nature of modern media is that you can create, you know. People like to talk about like content bubbles, but that's really not the frame they need to understand it. It's a reality tunnel that's made out of concrete that you can live wholly inside of. And the reinforcing of that tunnel is how you keep people locked into your ideas, even when it starts to personally affect them. And this is a very powerful tool, and it's highly utilized. And you can see content that like comes up in like the English language right will quickly make its way across to every other language group, sometimes not even bothering to translate it. And it's very amazing how this has been able to have such a first mover advantage and how asymmetrical the battlefield is now. And still, you have to really like convince a lot of politicians like you got to do this. You have to play this field. And not only that, you have to understand what your opponents are doing at all times. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think especially with that type of stuff, as you said, like reinforcing those your viewers is opinions, and your to get your views onto them. The right has, I feel like, in that sense, has done that better than the left because I feel like the right, when someone's viewing consistently right wing content, a lot of them are saying the same dangerous things, and then a lot of people can't get out of that sphere essentially because they're only on platforms where right wing content is spewed really, and that's going to bring me on to my next question, which is going to be, in your opinion, when you look at first of all of the content that's on the internet across all different platforms, and when you look across Europe, in the UK, do you think that the right wing and especially the far right is becoming like as prominent as they claim to be? And if that is true, then how do we counter it as anti-fascist, anti proper hard conservative people?
So there's two sides to this. It's like, are they objectively getting larger? And you could say like yes, or they're maybe consolidating existing vote that was there that was untapped. I think we can see that more often than not, especially like in the early Trump years. The other side of it is giving the perception that they're growing. And that is just as real at the end of the day for their communications purposes as actually having material support. You know, you can make things seem infinitely more popular, and by making them seem more popular, you get real people to believe it's a thing. And this is kind of like going back to what you were alluded to earlier. It's like you can do this with bots, you can do this with volume of content. I think this is something that a lot of people don't understand about kind of like the Bannon theory of communications. It's that, you know, yes, you're flooding the zone with shit. This is not just a communications policy, but this is also a governing policy, and both of these things reinforce each other. And you do this at such speed and volume that it becomes a totalizing thing. So it's much more clever than we kind of give it understanding for. But a lot of it is structural, right? It is they spent money and resources to build up platforms, influencers, organizations like Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA has an over 80 million annual budget. Like this is playing politics for real. And that's like kind of the thing. I used to tell a lot of people I think at the time, like Shapiro's show, like Ben Shapiro's show was like 17 million was like the budget for his company. And I would tell people if I had $17 million, I could overthrow a government. Like you can do so much with that level of money in marketing and communications, especially if you're willing to do like unethical things of just like kind of going all the way. And this is a big problem. Um, there's like many ways we could like answer like why the left or why liberals or the Greens are like way behind on all of this. But I think honestly, it's just they don't operate on the international level like the right does. And that is a huge component of their success because, you know, like we just had CPAC last weekend here in Hungary. In Budapest. So this is a huge event. It brings together a ton of right wingers and far right people. And the main point of this is two things. One is for these people to socialize, so they build up human ties with each other, people from politics, academia, the media, all these other kind of like different spaces within their big broader movements. But more importantly, it's to unify their messaging and political positions so that whether you're in Germany or in the US or in Belgium or wherever, everyone's saying the same lines again and again and again. And so the reinforcing effect becomes even more extreme because it would be very bad if this was happening just on a single country national scale. But then you have the situation where you can have people in the replies and one person could be like, well, actually, I'm also from this place and I know this to be true too. And it makes you start, you know, it creates a perception of reality. And both of these people then become reinforcing to one another because they believe this thing is real because more and more people say it's real. And this is very, very dangerous. And this is not like touching anything with like AI and then like the more like messier stuff like deepfakes and all this other kind of like objectively false information being pushed around.
Obviously, I mean, obviously, the main I want to say influences of politics around the world are US influences. That's not. I think we all know that. But when they start commenting on things that are happening in the UK, in the EU, then turning it into this massive issue, which usually doesn't even exist, and they don't even experience whatever the thing they're talking about is because they live, thousands of miles away across the Atlantic. But what it does is that it does two things, in my opinion. First of all, it creates, as you said, a false reality of what's actually happening here. And it gets a lot of people because they've got a lot of followers, a lot of people who aren't as necessarily involved in politics as the people who are commenting on these things. They'll think, oh, this must be happening because this person has got millions of followers. They've done a lot of research on this. When it's just someone making a random comment because they've seen an AI video. But the other thing it does is that it doesn't necessarily make things country specific. So you'll get like an American saying, oh, for example, as they always say, the UK is being overtaken by Muslims, which
London
isn't.
has
Yeah,
fallen.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
what this
yeah,
is.
yeah.
It's which is stupid because it then makes the whole of Europe just say why should we do work with the UK like this because that's happening. Well, it makes people think that don't come to London because it's got too many Muslims. You're thinking first of all, why is that necessarily a bad thing? They're all individually, these people are lovely people. They've done nothing wrong to this country. So why you're targeting them is beyond me because of a video which is usually fake. And the second thing is like they don't come here and they put people off coming here because of literally just propaganda and spewing this stuff.
I mean, the thing that winds me up in about these of the UK is when they go after Sadiq Khan, and I'm not gonna glaze him as like a perfect politician, but like he's just a normal dude. He's just like a regular dude. You never think about him when you live in London. You're like, oh, you're right. He's still the mayor. That's all you ever think, and it's just like he's just like the most vanilla regular guy. He's just a regular English dude, right? And it's they are like he's the Antichrist. He's the reason the UK is falling. And I'm like, bro. He like the mayor of London has so little powers. The assembly has so little
And
powers. It's
they'll put
mostly
like a video.
ceremonial.
They'll put a video of him like not singing along to like the fourth verse of a carol, which not many people have even heard of themselves. And you're there saying, "Oh, he must not be up with Christian values." But like when they put a video of him online of him doing something which is it's nothing really. I wouldn't be able to sing whatever carol he was singing, and I'm well, half Greek, but I'm British and white. But they wouldn't say that for me. It's purely based on the fact that he's a Muslim, that he's brown, and it's just stupid because these are people that don't even live in this country, and they're just trying to instill fear into genuine people for no apparent reason to get what benefit. Actually, it doesn't make sense.
Exactly. And honestly, like it's so absurd because anytime after like September in the UK, it is like nonstop Christmas every day. Like the UK goes so hard with Christmas. Like even my wife, who's from Austria, where they're like uber Christmas people, she was just like, yeah, Britain sometimes goes a little bit higher on the Christmas than we even do. Because like there's all the British Christmas stuff, and then sometimes we do like cosplay German Christmas on top of that one. But yeah, I mean, but it is to create this false reality, and it's very easy because you can just say like, you can talk about a city that people just know because of pop culture, like London or Paris or wherever, and then you just say like, all these things are happening. They could be completely fake, or sometimes they'll be like a little smarter and they take like highly distorted ideas or events happening and can try to blow them up out of control. Um, and it not only makes people like latch onto a politics of hate and kind of conspiracy and this false reality, but at this doing that means that they don't actually engage with the material reality of the politics that is actually happening around them. So things cannot get fixed if we're just always dealing with imaginary problems that only exist because they've been pumped up to be made like fundamental to everyday life. I think the other thing in like the UK that I think that gets so much time and it's just so frustrating is just like attacks on trans people. It's just like the thing that you can read in every single paper every day in all the major papers in the UK, and you're like there are not even this many fucking trans people in this country. Like how is this something that is always being discussed? And you're just like, we have real problems. There are real issues. It's like the fucking water companies and the shit, and like there's real stuff going on. And instead, we get
But
to
I choose
talk.
to focus on minorities.
Yeah, we choose to focus on minorities and whatever weird predilections like a bunch of columnists at the Times and a bunch of other
Yeah.
papers have. Like that's really it. We get to deal with the drama of our media elites, whatever thing they're randomly obsessed with for several months.
And
Yeah,
obviously doesn't help with most European and UK media where it's controlled by conservative bit like Rupert Murdoch, who controls most of the newspapers in the UK. He's a Conservative Party ex-donor, and he's also and the owner of GB News is the main donor for Reform UK. Nigel Farage having £400,000 of shares in GB News. It is crazy. And you're thinking,
yeah.
no wonder we get all of this propaganda because it's being fueled by conservative people who aren't even from this country.
You live in a very warped environment in just in like the normal mainstream media, and this is unfortunately true in a lot of countries. And so you'll either have like a complete dominance of like conservative talking points and angles, and even amongst like more liberal or left-wing papers, this will still be in effect because for some reason, because these issues are astroturfed so much, they feel compelled to continue writing and talking about them, and also talking about them in the framing that has been designed by the far right to make us talk about the issue in a particular way. And it's very dangerous because it creates a endless creep towards a particular framing in politics and a particular truncation of the Overton window. I usually like talk about this in terms of like an idea I've kind of coined. I'm kind of embarrassed to talk about this. Overton magnetism, in that like you get pulled to a particular point of discourse that is not just like what's possible, it's also like what sucks attention into it.
I mean, it is just crazy because one thing that the far right and a lot of the obviously owners of our media, one thing they're really good at is spewing out propaganda. As we've just discussed with London, we've also said that shifting the Overton window, most of the time they're shifting it to something which doesn't exist. They're putting people to talk about things which A aren't even problems and B there's very little evidence to suggest that they are. But my question to you is, you've done a lot of work on debunking the far right, and you do a lot of videos on making sure that people are hearing what needs to be heard rather than whatever's been made up by God knows who. So when you're looking at content that's being posted by the far right and other conservative thinkers, how often is it that you see propaganda and lies, and how do you identify that? Like for people who are less involved in politics, if they're reading a piece of news, how are they more likely, or how do they find out whether it's propaganda?
I would say the stuff I'm making is also propaganda because I'm making content for a political purpose. If we're using like the dictionary version of this term, um, propaganda doesn't have to be trying to manipulate you to believe false things or to believe things that are against your benefit. And there is always going to be a curation problem of what you're presenting and not presenting. Some of this is like could be malicious, but some of it's also like the format itself, right? Like you're doing shorts on TikTok, you can only fit so much information in, and also just realistically, there's only so much info a brain can take in that short amount of time, or however fast you can talk. Um, I watch a shocking amount of right-wing content, and I think all of it is in essence propaganda. It is trying to move you towards a particular position. Whether they're doing that with falsehoods or not, I mean, more often than not, it is made up nonsense. Like I'll be honest with you. And the reason it gives even if people are using like sources, a lot of these are kind of like think tanks or that are created just to create these kind of reports to justify the talking points. So like, we know a lot of the big ones like the Heritage Foundation or the Claremont Institute or all the ones in London. But this is kind of the game, right? One of the trendy things to say is like politics is upstream from culture. And I think it's even more clear for the right because for them, the culture war is the only war. If you win the culture war, you win everything else, and that's the end of the story. And you can see this in a lot of like the Project 2025 stuff, a lot of the actions of the Trump administration, and also the attacks on academia, public media like the BBC, but also other countries like where they've had their national broadcasters shuttered or are vastly defunded. And this is ultimately like the battlefield. If you can control like how you're educating children, which is also like a form of content that you're giving to them, it's just educational. And then also if you're able to control how people are engaging with their pleasurable content in their leisure time, whether that's news or anything else, because we also have to understand like people making news content like I do, and then also someone who is doing baking content can be giving over the same level of ideological, political socializing that either can do. So it doesn't matter like what particularly like the genre of the creator is, they can be feeding you politics at all times. And I think this is like the other side of it. It's like there are not only like less left-wing influencers who are smaller, there are less left-wing influencers doing less niches. So it's not just like you're losing because you're losing on an equal footing in all these platforms. You're losing because you're just physically is not able to measure it out. And because there isn't like these massive organizations able to subsidize hundreds of influencers, and this creates a major structural problem. If we're also thinking about like the UK is not the largest country within its language group, so it has a major problem. It has the US, which everyone can understand all this stuff, and again, like with AI and also just being a little deceptive, you can just pretend you're from another country, which is like we've seen a lot of the MAGA influencers from around the world who realize like you can make bank
I'm
making
America first, and then you look at that location, and it's God
America
knows what.
first,
Yeah,
Nigeria, baby.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Um, but even the you don't even have to hide it, right? Because like there's people like Ian Miles Cheong who lives in Dubai, and I think he's from Indonesia or something. So it's like you can become like a big American right-wing influencer, have never set foot in the U.S. And this is just like the kind of
it's not
how
necessarily saying that they are lying. It's just that you can't necessarily trust them all the time because they either don't live in America, they've never been to America, or they're just not from America in that way. Because it's like when people say like, "Oh, when I was growing up. It's like, well, you didn't grow up there, so what do you mean when you were growing up? That's a null point. But just things like that, you've got to watch out all the time to make sure that you're not being fed disinformation.
But it's also just like understanding that like there is such a fertile industry on the right for content creation and influencer spaces and their influencer economy that anyone can do it and do a moderate level of success with a significantly lower level of effort at the end of the day. And this is a big problem because if the barrier to entry is very low and the potential reward is very high, more and more people will jump in on doing that. And this means like not only do you have like more big influencers or medium influencers, small influencers, you also have like a bunch of people always trying to do it because it's also becomes kind of like a little bit of a get rich quick scheme or be famous fast.
People, they'll then do it for the wrong reasons, and they'll do it because they want to get views, money, and fame, and then it turns into this spiral of like you're just constantly posting things that you shouldn't.
Yeah, and I mean these that allure also exists like for all influencers, right? Like this is one of the major problems of the creator economy. Like you're forced to make more content and faster. And this is like how the algorithms work. It's one of the reasons why I think influencers really need to unionize, and it's one of the kind of my burner projects at the moment. Because if you're always being pushed to go fast and respond quickly, you will mess up, you will spread disinformation, you will have analysis that might come back to bite you later. And these things are not good, especially when we're dealing with like really big issues, especially like in times of war now. And this becomes, it's very easy to just fall into it. Like, I will see a news story and I'm like, this will be big. I have to do something on this. But you do need to spend a little bit of time to like research it, unless you already know like a lot about it already. Um, and unfortunately, like, I'm not gonna say I'm perfect, but a lot of other people are kind of very sloppy with their work. And of course they would be. They're now in this kind of like weird thing. A lot of influencers just start like making content and they don't have like a training in like journalism or like higher level research or like how to do a bunch of like source comparisons. And this takes time to kind of learn on your own as well, even if you're trying to be like really earnest and good about it. So yeah, I think this is the attention that exists innately in trying to be very fast in fast moving social media communication spaces. And you can see also like when newspapers try to do this and try to be a bit fast, they'll screw up in like kind of spectacular ways. Um, and this becomes more and more dangerous the bigger you get, right? The bigger you get, the more chance that your information is seen and interpreted by someone wrong. Or you put out something that's like not good. And then also you have to think these, I'm giving examples of like if you don't want to do that actively and as part of like your strategy of communicating. And many people are like, let me immediately crank out an AI video. I'll just like slap it together and blah blah blah. And this kind of slop content is also kind of like, it takes up
And it's become
space.
so real that it's hard to distinguish between what is slop and pointless and what is actually good content that's been made by someone who knows what they're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And then like, some issues are like actually quite complicated. Like the moral argument might not be that complicated, but like the nuts and bolts of it might be. So like if you can't explain to someone exactly why they need to be frustrated or angry at something so that they can then do something about it, then you're not really achieving your goal of trying to
Yeah.
like educate people. It's not great to just give people lots of reasons to be frustrated because then they're more likely than not going to turn that rage into impotent rage and then into apathy. And this is very bad. And I think, if I could make a critique of like the first generation of like more lefty influencers on social media, is that a lot of them were not attached in any way to kind of like party politics. And so or like organized politics in a broad way. So they weren't able to really bring their audiences into organized political work, and thus it meant their audiences really couldn't activate the things they were learning about
Yeah.
politics, whether that's theory or about specific events and situations. And that disconnect is the fundamental difference between like what's happening on the left when we're talking about communications online and what's happening on the right. But back to your question, how do I spot propaganda and lies, and how can you kind of navigate this news world? So one of my big pieces of advice is read books. Read books and papers from academics because they are spending a lot more time thinking about that topic than any journalist will be doing for the most part, just because of like the function of their job in the industry. This will give you a lot more broader understanding and deeper understanding on specific topics. And this will help inform how you should respond and think about events when they do occur. I think history is very important. Uh, reading kind of like the basic political economy books, so you have kind of understand the where a lot of these political thinkers are thinking about. That means reading some of the older stuff, like reading your Adam Smith, reading your Marx, reading like all these like the big texts that you really need to understand how we got to, this point in democracy. And then also spend a lot of time figuring out like from those books and then like the sources they cite, other academics that you can follow who study these things, because a lot of them will be posting on Blue Sky or Twitter or wherever, and they'll post stuff that, it's not even published yet, and they'll give you like new information, or they might be like posting news articles that you don't know because they're really deep in the topic and then more than you will ever be. At the same time, also because of the way journalism is now, where basically journalists have to write for a ton of publications because there's not a lot of permanent jobs, you need to really find journalists that you think know about this topic. And you're just going to have to start developing that skill of who you think knows what they're talking about, and then follow them individually. So
Yeah.
regardless of where they're publishing, follow them through, the things, because that person is now like your person who talks about like labor rights or the housing or whatever. And so you'll start building it out because you'll see who they interact with, and you'll be like, this guy
Yeah, and
also
then
has an
it builds
interesting thing,
your
or this lady.
sphere and that type of stuff as well, and you
Right,
get to
right.
understand your content. Yeah,
I think also it's important to think about how longer form content allows sometimes for the the takes to be a little bit more cooked, I would say, right? So if someone's like, spending, doing like 6 hours in a 6 part podcast about a particular niche thing, like you're going to get a lot more out of that than like any video that I can make in a short amount of time, even if I pack it full of like all the information possible. So this is like why books and articles and essays are like really, really good, because it also helps you slow down your brain a bit to start thinking about it as you're working your way through the content. And I think that process in itself helps you get a lot more comfortable with thinking about these topics, not just thinking about these topics, but thinking about how you think about these topics and where you personally stand in relation to the people you're hearing from, right? Because even if they're the expert and they're giving you like the factual opinion or the material opinion, some issues in politics are not material, they're moral value judgments, right? You should know where you stand at like any point of the day or like any point of in particular year. And for me, this helps a lot by consuming right-wing content, because if I have a very solid understanding of where I'm at on a lot of my own personal issues, I can absorb their stuff, right? And it kind of just bounces off because like I know where I stand on like all of this stuff. And then I hear their points, and it kind of acts as a bit of a armor from the intense
yeah,
indoctrination that
and
I'm
that
pushing
it
myself through.
also can help you argue as well with them, because from your moral standpoint. Because a lot of the time, I think the best debates won't necessarily come from when it's like a statistical debate, when it's a moral debate, because especially when you're analyzing whether someone is worth listening to, when they get into moral debate, they can show you a good example of who they are and how they think as well. Could you see a lot of people who are just, especially in politics, just plainly robotic? Like they base it always on facts, which sometimes when you look at things such as we said earlier, the trans issue, a lot of migration, a lot of it is based on morals. It's like letting someone be who they want to be, regardless of whatever stats you may have, which you don't like. And it shows you that, like, for a lot of people with me, it was a bit like, okay, this person, I don't agree with him on some of these moral standpoints, so maybe I'm going to be less likely to listen to them on when they talk about other things.
Yeah, completely. And I think also it's, politics. So there's like politics and then there's governance, right? To govern, you need to think about the logistics and the statistics and like how to actually make something work, because you're trying to build something or make a system function, and that requires a lot more of the hard uh, science part of political science, right? Because you're trying to design systems and govern well. But then the politics is about ideas and narratives and values and faith and dreams about where you want the future to go. And, very, very classical leftist take, because of like things like neoliberalism, where politics was kind of like whittled down to this idea of like, if we just gradually run the government well in a very technocratic way and just like keep everything oiled and then everything will just kind of work its way out. It doesn't work because you're only doing half of what you need to be doing. You can't just govern. You need to create an idea for people to latch behind, to create a narrative of a future that you're working towards. And these things are really, really powerful. And I think that's also, one of the, in kind of the same vein, but I think you'll get the connective tissue. You know, the traditional ideologies before fascism all more or less operated in an understanding that the utopia that they were trying to work towards was somewhere in the future. Whether it's 1 year, 10 years, 100 years, it's somewhere out there that we're moving towards. We don't know how long it'll take, but we're working towards something. But the fascist conception of time is fundamentally different. It's a complete 180. Instead of going towards a future that's somewhere out there, the future is always coming towards the fascists because it's just the final battle and then utopia exists. And because the final battle is always moving towards you, it gives your political thinking a completely different understanding of what you should be doing at all times. You're always playing for keeps. It's the last time, it's the last battle, it's the last election. It's everything is always on the bleeding edge and the apocalypse. And this is very strong to be used as a motivating force for a movement because if you have been convinced into this idea that, everything is coming at you and you must do all of these things, you will go way above and beyond what you would do if you thought, maybe we'll fix social housing in like 20 years. Like, or maybe, if we bail out Thames Water again, it'll be good this
Or
time.
they say like once we complete all of these objectives, especially the far right do this when they say, "Oh, once we get rid of this person, we can start working on things to benefit you." You're thinking, well, that's just not going to happen, is it? They're selling you a dream which will never actually come to anything.
Yeah, but I really think about what Dr. Timothy Snyder said. He says fascism depends upon weaponized unreality. It cannot function within a material understanding of the universe. And this is something that also is difficult for a lot of people to wrap their heads around because, for the most part, we were raised in one or another material traditions, whether it's like traditional conservatism or liberalism or Greens or socialists or communists. We all believe vaguely there is a material world that is objectively real that we
Yeah,
have to operate inside. Whereas fascism comes out of the Romanticism movement. It believes in myth as reality and that will and myth can shape
yeah,
reality. And that reality is what you choose and what literally the will believes it to be. And this creates big problems, right? Because once you detach from judging how good things are from material reality, democracy kind of breaks down a bit, right?
yeah.
Like, how do you communicate with someone who believes something is just real that is fundamentally not? And then is so kind of consumed in this worldview that they can be shown the thing to not be true. And then they'll just reinforce back. It's like, it's an illusion. It's a woke conspiracy. It's blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
And this is kind of like the sickness, the rot that fascism creates because we need people to exist in the real world. We need them to understand the things around them so that democracy can work and democracy can be more democratic and representative of everybody and not just like a small amount of political elites. And I don't just mean like the highest level of elites, like even you and I could be considered political elites because we're commentating and stuff. So it's like, but it's a tiny niche amount of people. Like if you look at the total party membership in the UK, it's around less than 0.5% of the
Yeah,
population. So it's a tiny amount of people in every single political
yeah.
party combined. And that's it. That's the whole political scene. And that's not good. Like it's not fundamentally good for democracy to be so little. And especially when we think about like your day-to-day life being governed, whether it's your city council or your parish council or wherever you're living, or like the commune where I'm living here in Belgium, uh, these are daily things that are affecting my life. The trash pickup, how the transit's going to work, blah, blah, blah. Like there's a million things that they do. And if people are not really engaged or they're just getting kind of whipped up into anger about like small arcane thing that the right has gotten obsessed with, they never engage with their society in a way that will change it in any way that they want it to be changed in the
Yeah.
first place. And so it disarms you. It takes you out of the ability to choose your own future and destiny and affect it because you no longer live within the actual world. You live within a fantasy. And most of the time, the fantasy is being sold to you by someone else who isn't you. So you're effectively living in someone else's version of time and trying to work towards someone else's version of what they believe politics should be. And not in like, oh, he's a great leader and inspired me kind of following, but in like a conspiracy world that just fundamentally doesn't exist. And
Yeah.
you've just been sucked in. And that's the problem. I mean, half of my family in the US, I have a British father and American mom. Um, but my mom's Latina, I'm Latino, and half of the family voted for Donald Trump. Like my grandma, who immigrated to the US from Honduras, voted for Donald Trump several times now, and it's not great. And you try to tell them again and again and again, like this is the things you were watching are not real, and it bounces off, and it's deeply frustrating. And it kind of gets me to the idea that and this is basically what I preach to people. It's like it's a big waste of time to try to de-radicalize people. And I take this position mainly because of like research I've done around denazification in Germany and Austria, and specifically Germany. Like it was a catastrophic failure. Like the Allies had shit tons of resources, and it fundamentally just didn't work. They gave up. All of them gave up after a very short amount of time, and it was just easier to kind of like pump more culture into people, different culture, playing rock music and jazz and a bunch of
Yeah.
stuff, and like setting up all this like an alternative than it was to actually try to do the hard work of deprogramming people. But at the same time, thankfully, not everyone's sucked into this worldview, right? We're not in elections where 100% turnout is happening, so we have an exact replication
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
what everyone in the country is doing. A lot of countries have terrible voter turnout. The UK is not, spectacular in voter turnout either,
Yeah, it's on
right?
its way to being proper, like not many people voting, but there are obviously other reasons for that. But yeah, you see a lot,
Yeah.
especially in Europe, this voter turnout is decreasing.
Yeah. So like if reform pulls up 30% in a 50% turnout election, that means they really only got 15% of the voter base. Like that's like we have to also like kind of remind yourself that like it's only as representative as many people showed up. And that gives me a lot of hope. It gives me a lot of, I wouldn't say optimism, but I think there is opportunity there. Like we're not completely screwed. Like things are bad. Like we're down some pretty dark roads already in a lot of countries. It'll take many, many years to kind of work their way out of it. But, the battle isn't lost. You can even see that, especially see that in the US, right? Like you have amazing amounts of like regular ass people guiding up and fighting against a tyrannical regime that is like killing people in the streets, like to be like real. Um, so, look at Hungary, right? The Hungarian election looks like Viktor Orban's going to lose by around 10%. And that's because people were like, you know what? He's bullshit. It's all bullshit. Everything around him is bullshit. And eventually like people do face like such level of like hardship because of like the reality of these illusions coming to light. But also, you have younger people coming up all the time. You have non-political people becoming political. You have non-voters becoming voters. And these are things that are constantly shifting and moving the political, landscape, but also like who is part of the democracy and who that you can potentially like get into a different way of thinking. And this is like the one hope you have to kind of always remind yourself. And while like Nigel's getting really big, and now we have like Reform Party 2.0 with what's
Rupert
his
Lowe,
name's party?
yeah,
Yeah,
Rupert
Rupert
Lowe.
Lowe. What are they
That's
called
yeah,
now?
Restore Britain.
Restore all with the R's.
Yeah,
But
I love them.
at the same time you have like Zach Polanski and the Greens doing something that like if you and I were told this like 5 years ago, we'd be like, there's no fuck, that's not real.
Yeah, yeah.
Like
But
it's
a
it's
politics of hope. Who would have guessed? Yeah. What do you think? Speaking of fascism, the far right, what do you think right now in Europe and the UK? Because the UK technically is part of Europe, obviously Brexit, and that, which is a whole another topic. But what do you think are the three main problems in Europe right now? Because if I ask someone who's, on the conservative side, they'll go like immigrants, they'll go wokeism, and they'll go by the EU. I don't know. They're probably what the thing to say. But what do you think are the actual main problems that we have in the UK right now? Is it the threat of anti-democracy? With I mean, Viktor Orban is one. The National Rally in France is another one who is looking like that. I mean, from UK, you could argue that they are somewhat anti-democratic. So, what do you think are the main problems that we need to address?
So like the UK has like structural problems, right? Like there's like infrastructure that's like falling apart. There's like a like the UK just has some of the worst housing on the continent. It's so like when you tell non-British people like how bad some of the flats you've lived in are, they're like that can't be legal, and we're like I wish it wasn't. I wish it was. Um, but yeah, I mean it's a lot of like normal problems. It's like we need more transit. They need to spend money on this. We need public ownership of utilities because they've been so screwed up because of the privatization. A lot of it's just like rebuilding stuff around the country. Um, the UK is far from migrants being a problem. The UK needs a lot more migration because we have a lot of old people that need to be taken care of. Like that's just like a reality that we have to deal with. And
Especially with an aging population as well.
yes, and a very aging population, and because the NHS is so good, people stay alive way longer, and this will not go away anytime soon, unless like we hit a hard stop on like the ability to get better medicine, which is just unlikely. Uh, so it's like what are big deals? Like the UK is like Brexit is one of them. It's like it's a constant drag on the entire economy, and it also like politically weakens the UK in a profound way, and it makes it very vulnerable. Um, the war is kicking off. I mean, Iran for one reason, but like the persistent threat of the Russian Federation in Ukraine, like this is a constant pressure on the entire continent that kind of complicates everything and makes everything into a much more dangerous geopolitical situation when it could be otherwise. Um, you know, we need more doctors to be trained up, and this is in the future, but this is also something that can only take place on the time span of like decades because you have to train these people. You can't just like magic up 18-year-olds that you could throw into a crash course
It's crazy
doctors thing.
because everything you've just listed now are normal, everyday issues that we face. But you go on to GB News, you look at all of the conservative and the far right sort of sphere of UK politics. They won't address these things. And if they do address them, they'll say, oh, the NHS is failing because of migrants. Well, considering that they actually keep it alive, it's hard to make that judgment. Or it's like there's poor housing because there's not enough left because the migrants are taken. Well, it's not that. It's the fact that we don't build any social housing. And you're thinking it's crazy how far some people are in this country where it's like these are the evidence. You fix these problems, the country is a much better place. You remove some people you don't like because of their race or whatever, the country's going to be a worse place. It's crazy to me that you just listed out everyday problems and you won't hear this in half of the country's sphere.
Yeah, like some of the other stuff is like underfunding of the BBC, which means like local stations are shut down, which means like they basically don't have local news anymore in a very different but similar way of the US problem. There are so many things that need to be addressed in the UK, like really basic stuff, all the way from the council level or all the way up to like the international level. And because whether it's Keir Starmer's government or the long conga line of Tory prime ministers, they just chose not to do these things, or they were just like, we'll shoot it off to a private company that will pay enormous fees to like
Yeah.
just no longer have the issue in Parliament because it's politically toxic or whatever. Like we'll just like let's throw it over there, or just
They'll try and suppress us all completely.
exactly. And
Yeah.
you can see this in like very spectacular fashion in stuff like HS2 and like the like the hilarity of it ending in a field. It and I think, if to go back to like why the like reform and like GB News and stuff does this, it's because fundamentally they do not have answers to these problems. Like they have fantasy versions of these answers. It's like, oh, what do we do about the energy crisis? It's like we do the North Sea oil fields, and then you're like, okay, even if we actually were serious about doing that, like it would take years and years and years and years to set up that infrastructure, and then also might not be profitable in any way possible.
You also got to
Um,
think by that time, with the amount of renewable energy investment we do, it will probably be covering enough or the same amount that the drilling would do itself anyway.
yeah. So it's and then like because they want to feed like I mean obviously like and they have like gas and oil money behind them. They have all these like sketchy corporations, right? I mean, Reform is literally a corporation and not a political party. Like it is so in your face. Like he goes over to the US all the time to hang out with Donald Trump and all these other wankers. Like For real, guys,
Did
can't
you
you
see
see this?
recently how there was something, I can't remember what came out. It was a statistic of some sort which said that, oh, Nigel Farage is the most popular party leader in the UK, and then people traced the location of that poll to the exact location that Reform UK's HQ is, and you're thinking like it's crazy. It doesn't make, and they're also called Reform UK Limited as a cut on Company's House. It's just it's run like a company, not a party that serves people.
If a party is effectively just, for, a lot of these kind of reform style parties exist in like Central and Eastern Europe, right? It's like oligarch parties with like one member and like it exists because the oligarch wants a political party. Like that's Reform UK. Like that's it. It's just an oligarch party. Nigel isn't even the richest person in that party, and it functionally exists to be like a front for a bunch of like sketchy rich dudes with really reactionary to fascist politics. And this is a big problem. People kind of doesn't don't think about it. It's like if the political party I'm joining or participating in has no internal democracy, has no internal processes for me as a member who's giving my time and energy and support to this, would this not reflect very poorly on how they would govern in real life, like in actual power? Like people should make this idea in their head. It's like, okay, if the party is very undemocratic, how will they act in actual power? You can see this with like labor right now.
Yeah.
Like Kier made labor incredibly, like it was already very undemocratic, but like he twisted it, and thus you get a government that reflects that internal party structure, which is
You look
not
at
good.
what he did with Andy Burnham, where he literally said to all of his MPs, "You cannot allow
No,
this guy to be." And it's crazy because he would have won the by-election if Andy Burnham was the thing. You're thinking you
he's like
just
literally
yeah.
the most popular labor politician, and he has
Yeah.
been for a very long time.
Yeah, and he's gone, guys. You can't allow him in because he's scared that obviously, inevitably, Andy Burnham would take his son's position. It's just he's making them feel like they can't do their job properly because they're constantly worried that he's gonna do something to, like he's gonna fire them or make them stand down, and they'll lose their jobs.
Yeah, and I mean, you can see that. Like, if you're a control freak in how you let the party function, you'll be a control freak, with your parliamentary group, and you'll be a control freak when you're running the ministries as well. And then it also like because of this nature, it doesn't make you very flexible or have rapidity when you're dealing with like actual events that are occurring all the time, right? Because if everything has to come from Kier or come from one of like the top lieutenants, then everything else on the lower level gets basically stopped,
Yeah,
or and no one wants to initiate it, as you said, through either fear or just like feeling dejected. I mean, you think about like some of the weird battles he's had with the Parliamentary Labor Party over like the two-child cap stuff, like these kind of like absurd things where you'd be like, why would you create that beef? You didn't need to do that. Like,
yeah.
let them have a free vote. It doesn't fucking matter. And he's like, no, my way, 100% has to be this, or you're disloyal. And it's like, no, dude, like it looks better, honestly, if it's not 100%. It looks like a real political party. Um, this is a kind of the system that we've been trained into thinking is normal. And I think it's actually like a bit scary for like the much younger people who are just getting into politics because they've only ever seen this, right? They've just seen like these very draconian leaders of various parties, whether it's Reform or Labor or several Tories, especially like post Boris, where he was like purging everyone.
Several
Yeah,
Tories who
right. It was just
will
like, if you
probably
don't love me, go away.
by the end of the month will probably be in reform themselves anyway. But because
Yeah,
that's what we
yeah.
see now. Anyone, yeah, they will move over. They're becoming disloyal to their own party. That's another thing that was crazy. It's just like any Tory who knows that they're not going to win their seat by being a member of the Tories. It's crazy to me that suddenly they're just going to switch and think that everyone's going to forget what they've done. And I find it crazy that like a lot of these reform voters will be like, so Robert Jenrick, oh, the guy that we hate because he allowed the migrants in, but as soon as he returns to reform, it's like, oh, we love the guy, he's against migration. You're thinking, where is the thought process there?
But remember, it's not for us. It's
Yeah,
it's it's for it's already for people inside the loop. And it sounds stupid, but people love a redemption story. They love people having seen the light and converts, and there is a
yeah,
lot of like there is a religiosity to this kind of like far right politics in that like you've seen the light, you've become acknowledge some truth about the world. For the Tories, it's like Nigel was always right, or it's like, oh, the Tory party was the reason I had to do all these things. They're evil and blah blah blah. So like it's very you can become characters, and you have to think about it from like their angle. And a lot of these people already had like some pretty right-wing politics, like Suella Braverman. Um, and yeah, I mean, they really gamble that their totalizing media can block out any questions. And because it's so voluminous and constant, that, yeah, you might have a problem with Jenrick being there, but also like you're 99% of the way there. So like whatever,
Yeah.
Robert's there, it doesn't matter. Um, I mean, I think also at the same time, like reform is a lot weaker than I think we all assumed it was, and Gordon and Denton really showed that because like that was like their best candidate possible, like their famous guy who everyone knows, who like
Yeah.
the whole right wing world could like rally behind, except for like more extreme, kind of like Nick
Well, I
Fuentes
say
even.
more extreme, but you see the things that he said. He's referenced himself he says he agrees with Tommy Robinson. He thinks you can't be if you're not white, you can't be British. So is there that much more? I mean, that was there is more extreme, but
Oh no,
you're
no. I
thinking
mean,
he's
this is all quite bad. I think that the next line is just being like an actual neo-Nazi.
yeah,
So like that's that. When I mean like it's like him and then Nick Fuentes. Like that's the next step over basically. Because like you know even Tommy's not going that far yet. But also he has a lot of like questionable connections with foreign governments that make his politics quite erratic.
well, Matt Goodman
The
the same when he goes, oh, not Palestine first, not Pakistan first, and they go, well, what is it first? And he goes, whoa, stop right there. Yeah.
the crypto donation ban is a big deal. Like it is a huge thing that is going to fuck up reform because they were really dependent upon
They're
getting
relying
a
on
lot of
stuff.
dirty
Yeah,
money through crypto. Yeah, like that is how you move a shit ton of money now.
yeah,
And you know we can see that in like really spectacular fashion with like all the Trump coins and all this other stuff. Like, but this is like one of the new metas, right? It's like you know you manipulate markets through meme coins, you move money around, and that allows you to get around any kind of campaign finance in most
yeah,
countries. um and even if you want to still do it illegally, like it's a lot easier to do than like any other form of
yeah.
money laundering. um so I'm very curious how that'll go. I was a bit concerned that some of the media in the UK was discussing this of like, oh, they're just doing this for the political purposes. And I'm like, yeah, but also that's not really the big issue. The big
Yeah.
issue is like this guy's getting a lot of illegal money into the election.
Sorry, are there any good news or optimisms coming out of Europe right now that we don't see so much because we're constantly being suffocated by bad news from situations which might not even be bad news? Like, do you see? Obviously, we look at Orban's going to potentially lose power. You said that Meloni didn't win her referendum. I saw you did a lot of content on that.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
see,
yeah.
France pretty much the RN didn't win many elections last week in their in the municipalities. So,
They
are
way
they optimisms?
underperformed. This last weekend was really great. I think it's the best I would say like the left-wing forces in Europe have had for quite a while. So in France we had the municipal elections which you know, Rassemblement National, Le Pen's party, with Jordan Bardella, they were predicted to do like ridiculously well in a lot of the polling. And you know, they've had kind of the wind behind them for a very long time at this point. But in French politics, things are still very split on the local level. A lot of it has to deal with like local party beefs with each other and also like things that are actually happening through local governance. And even though on a national level, parties like Les Républicains, so like the more traditional right-wing center-right party, and the Parti Socialiste, their center-left party, like they're still really powerful on the local level, even though they're not doing like spectacularly good on the national level, which means that it's not the kind of like the clean sweep that a lot of the RN campaigns before have been. And honestly, like them retaining them meaning like the Parti Socialiste getting a lot of the mayoral positions, especially in places like Strasbourg, where Rassemblement National was like ridiculously popular just a few years ago, is, you know, it feels quite good. It feels like something that's moving in a good direction. At the same time, LFI, France Insoumise, they that this is Jean-Luc Mélenchon's party. They did also quite well as well, and also even like overperformed in some places. So it ended up with like many more left-wing people being in there, many more Greens, many more people from across the board, and also just like fundamentally like less people from RN coming in. So like
And
that's
it
that's a big
kind of
deal.
reflects, I think what's going on in Europe right now, where there's now a shift. sort of in a lot of countries away from the far right. And I guess I have to credit Trump for that because I think a lot of these countries look at Trump in America as like their baseline for how they're going to be when governing, and they realize, hang on a second, this guy's done nothing for Americans. He's made them all poorer. He's causing carnage on the streets, killing his own citizens, and they're thinking, well, I don't want that for my country, so maybe going that far is not a good idea.
No, no, I completely agree. I think he's in many ways he like Brexit is like a cautionary tale. It it makes real something that's just been spoken about in by right-wing politicians, and then people, even if you're very resistant to the idea that like Europe could get as bad as the US, you're way less resistant to that idea now on Trump too. And especially with how powerful a lot of the right-wing parties are. At the same time, you know, you had this referendum for the judiciary in Italy, and this was like one of the many referendums and kind of constitutional reforms that Maloney's trying to shove through before the next election. This one, it would take a little while to explain, but the most important thing is she thought it was going to kind of be a simple election where it wouldn't raise a lot of steam. She was trying to get kind of the more, it's a radical reform, but it's like on the lower end of all the things
Yeah,
she wants to do, right? And the left-wing parties were able to rally, unite, and get behind the idea of a no campaign, which they had not been able to do effectively for quite a while now. This is the first major defeat of her entire rule, basically. And then just since then, she's had to have two ministers resign, one of them because of ties to the mafia, peak Italy. Monday she lost the
yeah,
referendum, then Tuesday she lost a minister, Wednesday she lost a minister. So like she's not doing good. And fundamentally, like Giorgia Meloni with her ECR group and Viktor Orban are the main pivot points of the right in Europe. So how they go is really reflective on how everyone else will be doing because like they're the center of their respective kind of like sphere of influence. Um, with the Slovenian elections were also very important too because this was the mini Trump of Janez Janša. And this guy, he's been prime minister several times, three times to be exact. Uh, Comical levels of corruption, like bonkers wild. Technically is in the center right grouping of the EPP, but he's like far right dude. Brought in Israeli private spy agency Black Cube to help him on the election.
yeah.
It was like it was a fucking crazy thing. Like honestly, I hadn't seen an election that wild since the Romanian one last year, and he lost by like the hair of his neck. So he lost by like half a percent. The current prime minister won. They're gonna struggle to form a coalition. They're probably gonna have to go back into elections in 3 months. But now that he kind of screwed himself over by doing something really, really illegal and then losing the election, he's gonna face a lot of legal issues. It's okay if you do a illegal thing and become the president and prime minister. It doesn't work if you lose.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so, I mean, and then also, you know, we also have to think about this. There's things happening on the national level, and then there's also things happening on the European level. And both of these things interact in a very direct way. So, however, local elections go down, or regional elections or national elections will be directly reflected on what happens on the top level. Right now, because of still the legacy of the last EU elections, there is a conservative far right coalition governing the EU. On paper, it's meant to be liberals, social democrats, and conservatives, but in reality, the ruling coalition is the right and right.
Yeah.
And that's bad. They're passing a lot of very dangerous things right now. One of them they just approved to lock up children into deportation centers. That just happened today. The other one that happened today was this what's being called the surrender deal. Basically, this was the EU-US trade deal where the EU would just unilaterally accept 15% tariffs indefinitely,
Oh
and then
wow.
also have to pay
Yeah.
hundreds of billions of dollars for American fuel, gas, nuclear energy, weapons, crypto, or no, not crypto, AI microchips. Like it's a shakedown. It's just a massive shakedown.
You've got great content. Everyone who's watching this should check, if you haven't seen him already, check him out. He's goes into such deep dives, and as he said, although it's short form content, your content is still really, really informative, and you're pushing the right agenda and the right things.
Yeah, I we've also started up a new political organization, a few of my friends called Indivisible Belgium, part of the broader Indivisible family out of the US. You might know them for their No Kings rallies, which are huge. And so we're just getting that started up right now. We'll have our first meeting in a couple of weeks and go forward on there. and it'll help Americans and people not from the U.S. to organize in Belgium for progressive causes, not just U.S. stuff, but also things domestic to here. And I think it's very important to get people organized. And also one more shout out. I'm also an officer in Democrats Abroad, which is like the international organization for the U.S. Democratic Party. So if you know Americans abroad, tell them to get politically organized because they can still do a lot of stuff from abroad, and we need all hands on deck because otherwise the republic falls if you don't try to defend the republic. That is just the fundamental reality of the time. And just because you've moved away doesn't mean you can't help to change things for the better. So,
Well, thank
yeah.
you very much, RoteRote. It's great to have you on.